Welcome back to the second part of the iPhone X tutorial. In this video we will go over the materials and the lighting to set it up like it is shown in the Apple images. The first one will be the chrome edges around the phone. So create a new material, and I'm also going to name it to keep an overview. We will set the color to black just to be sure if I want to adjust the reflection. But actually it doesn't really matter right now because we will add a reflection, which will be a GTX, and you can keep it untouched so it is some kind of mirror finish. Let's drag that on top of the iPhone, and when you scroll down here you can see it is actually applied to the bool object, which is okay, but we also want it to be applied to the actual phone model itself. Looking closer to this, we also have these buttons which need to be reflective, so just drag the material on top of them too. And there is one last thing I need to point out, and that is the inside of the cutouts are not reflective, and in most cases we actually want it to be reflective. So what we can do is searching that cutout object we made earlier under the bool object. And actually you want the chrome material to be on all of them, so you can try dragging it on the group, but that isn't enough it seems, because it isn't applying here. So I'm just going to copy it on every single object and extrusion inside of it. So that way you can see it is actually applied to the object. Okay, next up we will go over the glass rim around the screen. So create a new material again. For the color we want it to be almost black, but not exactly pitch black. And then go to the reflectance channel. And we will just work with the specular, which we can adjust just a little to make it a little bigger in the width, but also smaller in the fall off. So it is a soft specular. You can also add a reflection if you want to, but I recommend keeping it at a very low transparency if you do that. To apply this to the actual phone, we need to find the base object and not the bool itself. And we need to go in the polygon mode. And now it is a matter of selecting the right polygons. A good thing to do is going in the front view, or back view in my case still. And you want to select everything inside of this line, so everything all the way to the screen. So this will be 3 polygon loops in my case. An easy way to do this is using the loop selection tool by pressing U and L. And then you can select the loops while holding Shift, instead of having to go all around the iPhone every time. Also make sure you add these small polygons and the notch itself. Let's also do the same thing on the other side. And now in the perspective view you should be able to drag it on top of there. Looks like I missed one piece. There we go. Okay, next up let's create those antenna lines on the sides. So a new material again. We can just do this with a gray color, something in the middle. And maybe we will also add just a little reflection on this, so a 4% transparent beckman layer, and that will do for the antenna. To apply this again we need to select that base model again. And find the right polygons. We added these on the end of the previous video, so just select these on the sides. It looks like I forgot to make an exact cut at this side, so I'm just going to apply the material already, so I can go to the other side and do it there. If it doesn't drag on the object itself and on the bool, you can just disable the bool object and then try again. So I'm going to select these edges I made earlier on, and I can right click and select slide. And when I press the clone option and drag, you should be able to make a cut. The next material can be the glass back. For the color it depends if you want a black iPhone or a white iPhone. I'm going with the black one. So that is some kind of dark gray with a hint of blue in it. Under the reflectance you can actually disable the specular because it will add too much reflection because it is just a big large plane. So it would turn out brighter than it actually is. Instead we are going to add a beckman layer. And we will make this just a little rougher so the reflection gets blurred out. And we will also decrease the strength to something like 50% to make it a little darker. Let's select the object itself again. and we can select this back polygon. And we will also add some of these rings, 3 of them like we did on the screen. So it is symmetrical and it is also totally covered. You may also need to disable the bool again. For the camera at the back, we can also select the object, and we want this ring around it to be chromed out as well, so I can drag the old material we made on it. But for the cap on the front, we will use a new material. We will make this black again, and under the reflectance channel we will disable the specular again, but add a becnel layer at 4% transparency, and we can keep the rest untouched. So let's drag that on the cap, both of them to be sure. In this case it isn't working because we have the camera with the reflection of the chrome as a parent of the other caps. So what we can do is just moving them outside of the camera null, and we will group these 3 together in a new group. Another thing we could have done in the previous video is actually adding some thickness to the side here, but I'm just going to select the front cap, go in the polygon mode, and we can select this ring we made earlier and add the chrome material to that as well. You may have to disable the bool object again. For the camera lenses, we will use a special material. You can make the color very dark blue. And all the rest will happen under the reflectance. We will just work with the specular. Let's decrease the width, so it is a sharp, very shiny reflective material instead of something very soft. I'm also going to increase the strength of it, so it is more visible. And to make it look like an actual lens, like we see it on the iPhone images of Apple, we can change the color of the specular to something more bluish. Let's drag that on the lenses, also at the front. But I'm also going to make a new material which will be more kind of plastic, which is around the actual lens, because the lens is just a sphere and not the ring around it. In this case, because it is just such a small piece, we can even disable the reflectance and keep the color. And I'm going to make it a very dark gray again, which has a hint of blue again. So select the object and drag the material on top of it. Let's also do the same thing on the back. For this centerpiece, which will be the flash, we need 2 materials, because we have a top which will be yellow and the bottom which will be kind of orange. That is how the flash is made for the iPhone. So let's create the first one and we will duplicate it for the second one. The yellow one will have a color which is soft yellow with a hint of gray to it. Or even gray with a hint of yellow to it. We can also copy this color and add it on the luminance channel. We can also enable the transparency and set it to 78% or 80% or something. And we will add a refraction of plexiglass, which will look okay. And under the reflectance channel, we will add a beckman layer again. And we can already decrease the transparency to something like 10% again. And lastly, we need to activate the bump channel, because it will create those little rings it has to it. So what we will do is add a gradient texture to it and open that. We will set the type to 2D circular. And now we will just make alternating notches, which will be black and white, something like 20 in a row. Let's also jump back to the bump settings, and we can increase the strength to something like 60% to make it stronger. Now let's duplicate that material to make a second one, and this will be the orange one. We just need to adjust the color, so it is orange. And we can copy the color again to the luminance channel as well. And now we need to apply it to this cylinder. So our first thing we need to do is make it editable, so we can select the polygons we want. I'm going to select the bottom ones and drag the orange one on it, and then select the top ones and drag the yellow one on it. Okay, we're getting close to the finish of the materials. We still need some things at the front here. For these circles, it is just a very simple material, and we will duplicate the glass rim material, and we can keep everything the same, but we will just add a hint of red to the color. And under the right angle you can see it is just slightly visible. For the speaker grill it is a little different. We can do that with the color channel and adding a texture to it. So you can go to surfaces and pick the checkerboard and open that up. And we will set the frequency to something like 20, so it are very small squares. And we can keep the black ones, but the white ones will be a very dark gray, so it isn't exactly white anymore. Now drag that on top of that little speaker object we made. And we may also need to find this bool cut we made here, which doesn't need to be chromed out. So let's swap that material with the glass rim material. And I'm also going to disable the specular, or the reflection on this one. Let's take a look at the bottom. This rim can be the plastic material we made earlier. I'm also going to find this cutout, because it doesn't need to be reflective as well. And maybe we can also make it plastic. And we also need to add the chrome material to the screws. Also make sure to add it to the actual bool objects of it. Okay, before moving on to the screen, we will just add the logos on the back. We can easily do this by adding a plane object to it, which we will rotate. And I'm going to make a new material for it. All you need to do is finding the logo on the internet, which should be easy in this case. And we will add it under the color channel as a texture. But to get rid of the background on the image, we need to enable the alpha channel. And also add the same image on there. And that will make a cutout for us. So drag that on the plane. And you can see we may need to resize it. Just try to place it as close as possible to the back. Now I'm going to duplicate this plane and move it downward a little, which will have the iPhone logo on it. So create a new material for this. And we will do the same thing again, but with the iPhone logo. So also enabling the alpha channel. Make sure you delete the Apple material on the second plane we made. And of course you need to resize it again. On the Apple logo, its material, we can also add some reflection even. And set it to something like 20%. So it is kind of reflective. And we also can set the color to something darker. And add a multiply mix mode to it, so it is actually visible to the image. So that way you can see this reflecting depending on the angle we are viewing from. Okay, so the last thing we need to do now is adding the screen material on it. But this can be quite hard to do because of the notch we have and the rounded corners. But I found an easy way to do this. So you need to find the base object again. And then in the polygon mode we will select the screen polygon we made. Let's create a new material for this, and this can be just an image of a screenshot of the iPhone or a background. Also do the same thing on the luminance channel, but we will decrease the brightness to 50% for example, so it isn't too bright, and still catches shadows if we wanted to. And let's see what happens if we drag it on top of there. Of course you need to disable the bool object again. And in some cases it may turn out just fine. But let's see what happens if I use another material. You can see it is upside down. So what we can do is go in here at the side and find that UVW tag and actually delete it. And now up here under tags, go to UVW tag and click this little cogwheel. And what we want to do now is making sure the projection type is set to cubic. And also the fit to selection is turned on. Press OK, and you will see it will fix that for us. If you make adjustments to the geometry, so making cuts on the edges or something, you will notice it will mess up the texture, but you will just need to repeat and delete that UVW tag we made now and create a new one under the tags menu. Okay, so that is it for the materials now. So let's move on to the lighting setup. So for the lighting setup we need something that reflects on the phone. if we render it like this, you can see it is just black because there is nothing around the object. So the first thing I'm going to add is the main reflective material. And you can disable the color channel on this one because we will be using the luminance one. So it is really bright. You can keep it just white. And we are going to add a gradient on this. And open that one. And we're going to change the type to 2D circular. And we can right click on the gradient and invert the knots so it is going from white in the center to black on the edges. The object we will be using to hold this material will be just a regular disc. You can rotate this and scale it up. It should be something like 2000 centimeters to cover a big enough area for the reflections. So drag that material on top of it and make sure it is on the side of the front of the iPhone. Something like this. And we are going to duplicate this one and move it on the other side, so the back of the phone. But for this one we will be using a slightly different material, so you can also duplicate the material we used. But for this, let's start off by setting the mix mode to multiply. And we're going to make it just a little darker so the reflections aren't exactly the same on both sides. So let's see what this gives on these sides here. And you can see we now have this white line on both sides, like it is on most Apple images. But this isn't the exact result we are looking for so far. Another thing I'm already going to do is adding a background object. And we will use a new material for this, which can be pure white. Drag it on top of there. But when we render, you can see the discs, of course. So you need to make them invisible for the camera, which you can do by selecting them and right clicking, going in the Cinema 4D tags and picking the compositing tag, and just uncheck the scene by camera option. And this way when we render, it is invisible. Another thing I found out while experimenting was that it is even more realistic if we add another object behind this disc, which is even more gray, so we have a second reflection on that side. I'm going to use just a plane for this one maybe, and rotate it. It can be even larger so you can see it behind the disc. Also place it behind it, of course. And I'm going to make a new material for this again, which can be just something gray, like 50% gray. And I'm going to drag that on top of there. Of course, we also need the compositing tag on this one, so you can actually hold Command or Control and drag it on top of there. So that means we are duplicating it. And the last thing I did in my own file is adding a sky object and just creating a new material again, which is almost black, like this, but not pitch black, and drag it on top of there. And this should make the black on the sides here a little less dark. Now if we zoom in on some of the details here and render again, you can see it is kind of grainy, but there is a solution for that, which is that we need to go in the chrome material, and under the reflectance we have to scroll down and open the drop down of the layer sampling. And we can increase these to something in the middle maybe, which should make it more sharp. Also the background is black again because we need the compositing tag on the sky as well. I feel like the chrome is still way too reflective because you can't even see the edge at the back here because it is too white and bright behind it. So let's take a look at the chrome. Maybe we can change the GGX mode from normal to add, and also decrease the intensity to something like 40% maybe. And let's take a look again. That's a little low, so let's take the double of it, 80% maybe. And that seems alright now. The phone is also way too reflective, so let's take a look at that one. This is also still at 100% intensity on the reflection, so I'm actually going to lower this to even something like 10% maybe. And let's take a look again. That looks more realistic, I guess. I also feel like the camera, its edge here is a little thick, so I'm going to undo that material on here. It also looks like I forgot to change the material on the second disc. I don't know why. And it also improves the look of the phone. And one last thing I also want to do is adding an ambient occlusion to this to make the small details more visible. Like this hole, for example, will now be more visible. One thing I still notice that is wrong is right here at the notch. You can see these circles we made are giving some shadows. So we need to find them and select them. Then here, right click on them, go to Cinema 4D tags and use the compositing tag again. And we want to make sure it has cast shadows disabled. And we are also going to disable scene by rays and scene by GI, so it is not interfering with any lighting. Maybe we can also make it just a little more red, so it is more visible. One last thing I want to point out is here at the edges. You can see it isn't exactly smooth. It has these lines to it. That is one of the disadvantages of using a bool object. But we can fix some of these parts. So let's select that base object and go in our edge mode. And with the knife tool, you can actually draw around the cutout of the button. By doing that, you can see it gives us back some of the smoothness right here. So that is something you can do on all the buttons and the sides where it is less smooth. Apart from that, that should be everything there is to modeling the iPhone X and texturing it. The one I made here on this tutorial is a little rough, because I can't concentrate on all the small details. But I still hope this video is a good start for you to make your own iPhone X model. If you don't feel like making all of this by yourself and you want to use the model I've been showing in the preview video, you can find this one on the Patreon page, the link is in the description. It would also help out if you leave a like on this video if you enjoyed the content, and I hope to see you on the next video.